In my family, my younger brother, Leo, is the dreamer. I am the pragmatist. He is the brilliant, charismatic ideas guy, the one who can paint a beautiful, soaring vision of the future with nothing but his words. I am the quiet, sensible older sister, the software engineer, the one who asks the boring, practical questions like, but what's the budget for that? And have you actually written a line of code for it yet? This dynamic was on full display last Sunday. At our weekly family dinner, Leo was in the middle of one of his signature, passionate monologues. It's a paradigm shift in social connectivity, he was saying, his hands waving in the air as he described his latest, half-baked genius idea, an app that would, apparently, use biodata to connect people with their perfect romantic soulmate. It's not just an app, it's the future of human relationships. My parents were hanging on his every word, their faces a picture of rapt, parental adoration. That's wonderful, son, my father had said, his eyes shining with pride. A true visionary. I, a woman who has spent the last decade of her life actually building and launching complex software, had made the mistake of asking a practical question. And how are you planning to handle the data privacy issues? Leo, I'd asked. The liability for storing that much sensitive biological information would be astronomical. The entire table went silent. They all turned to look at me as if I had just walked into a beautiful church and started screaming obscenities. My father had sighed, a long, weary sound of profound disappointment. Oh, Maya, he'd said, shaking his head. Don't be such a pragmatist. Don't you ever get tired of poking holes in things? Let your brother dream. I just smiled my quiet, pleasant smile. Someone has to be the one who actually builds the machine. I thought, dreams don't run on magic. They run on code. And you don't know the first thing about it. Have you ever been the practical one in a family of dreamers? It's a lonely and thankless job. You're the one who has to think about the budget, who has to ask the hard questions, and you always end up looking like the bad guy, the one who's raining on everyone's parade. If you've ever been the designated realist in your family, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hit that subscribe button. We are a tribe. Our family's dynamic was forged in the crucible of 100 different school projects. I remember our 8th grade science fair. I had spent a month meticulously building a working, scale model of a geothermal power plant. It was complex, it was well-researched, and it actually worked. Leo, on the other hand, had spent a single weekend building a fantastical and deeply unscientific diorama of a utopian city on Mars, complete with tiny, glitter-covered alien apartment buildings. My project got a B+ for technical execution, his one first prize for vision and creativity. He had given a brilliant, passionate, and completely improvised speech about the future of humanity in space. It didn't matter that his science was a work of pure fiction. He told a better story. That was the pattern of our lives. I was the builder, he was the storyteller, and in my family, the story was always more important than the substance. I have a good, stable career. I'm a senior software developer at a respectable financial tech company. I make a good living. I own my own home. My life is a testament to the quiet, steady virtues of hard work and competence. To my parents, my life is a crushing disappointment. It is safe, it is unimaginative, it is boring. Leo, on the other hand, has spent the last 10 years since college bouncing from one low-level sales job to another. He is 32 years old, and he still lives in our parents' basement, but in their eyes, he is not a failure. He is a restless genius, a visionary who is just waiting for the right moment, the right idea to change the world. They see his lack of a real career not as a failing, but as a sign of his profound, artistic soul. The truth is, I was a dreamer once, too. I had my own genius idea, and it was more than just an idea. It was real. I had built it, and it had almost changed my life. It was my senior year of college. I was a computer science major, and for my final thesis project, I poured my entire heart and soul into building an app. It was a social networking app, but it was different. This was years before the current generation of dating apps had taken over the world. My app wasn't about swiping or algorithms or finding your one true love. It was about something smaller, and, I thought, more beautiful. It was about fighting the loneliness of modern life I called it serendipity. The concept was simple. The app would use your phone's location services and a series of user-defined, real-time interests to show you anonymous other users in your immediate vicinity in the same coffee shop, the same library, the same park who shared your passions in that exact moment. Say you were sitting in a cafe, reading a book by your favorite obscure poet. You could tag your status with the author's name, and if someone else in that same cafe had the app, they would get a quiet notification. Someone near you also loves this poet. It would then allow you to send a single, anonymous message, a simple invitation to a real-world conversation. It wasn't a dating app. It was an app designed to create those small, magical, and increasingly rare moments of spontaneous human connection. I was obsessed with it. I spent a year of my life in a fever dream of coding. I taught myself 3 new programming languages. I built the back-end architecture from scratch. I designed the user interface. It was my baby. It was more than just a project. It was the most honest and passionate thing I had ever created. At the end of my senior year, I presented it to my family, my heart pounding with a nervous, hopeful excitement. I sat them down in the living room, and I showed them the beta version on my old, clunky laptop. My mother was politely confused. So it's a chat room for strangers. That doesn't sound very safe, dear. My brother, Leo, however, seemed genuinely interested. He asked a lot of questions. He played with the prototype for almost an hour. Wow, that's actually a really cool idea. Maya, he'd said, his eyes full of a strange, intense light I had never seen before. So you could, find someone in the same concert as you who also loves the same obscure opening band. Exactly, I'd said, thrilled by his enthusiasm. But then my father, the pragmatist, the accountant, had delivered his verdict. He had listened patiently to my entire, passionate pitch, and then he had given me a long, kind, and completely soul-crushing lecture on the harsh realities of the tech startup world. Maya, he'd said, his voice full of a gentle, paternal disappointment. It's a clever idea, a nice hobby, but 99% of these things fail. They are a black hole for money and time. You have a brilliant, practical mind. You have a degree that can get you a safe, secure, and well-paying job. Don't throw your life away on a 1-in-a-million pipe dream. Be smart, be sensible, take the safe path. And I, the dutiful daughter, the one who had always craved his approval, had listened. My own confidence, already a fragile thing, had withered under the cold, sensible light of his pragmatism. He was right. I wasn't a risk-taker. I wasn't a visionary like my brother. I was the sensible one. So I took the safe job. I put my heart, my dream, my beautiful, brilliant app into a folder on my old laptop's hard drive, and I left it there to gather digital dust. That was 10 years ago, a lifetime, the event that would set my brother's betrayal and my own reckoning in motion. Began with a broken water heater at my parents' house. I had come over on a Saturday to help my father fix it after we were done. My mother asked me if I could look at her old desktop computer, which had been running slowly. I went up to my old childhood bedroom, which was now a kind of family junk room, to find my old toolkit of diagnostic software, and there, in the back of the closet, under a pile of old yearbooks, was my old, clunky, and beloved laptop from college. On a whim, I pulled it out, I plugged it in, and after a long, slow, groaning boot-up sequence, it flickered to life, and there it was, in a folder on the desktop, labeled Senior Project, my app, Serendipity. I opened the files, a wave of nostalgia washing over me. I looked at the old, clumsy code I had written. I looked at the simple, elegant design. It was a good idea, a beautiful idea, a ghost of a life I could have had. I spent an hour lost in the past, a sad smile on my face. Then my mother called me for dinner. I closed the laptop, but in my haste, I didn't shut it down completely. I just left it on, in sleep mode, on my old desk. It was a small, insignificant oversight, a mistake that would change everything. I didn't think about it again. A week later, I came over for our usual Sunday dinner, and my brother, Leo, was there, his face alight with the fire of a new, brilliant, and life-altering idea. He announced, finally had his eureka moment, the one that was going to make him a star. He gathered us all in the living room, his eyes shining with a familiar, charismatic zeal. He began to describe his new app, an app that would, he said, change the way people connect. An app that would use your location and your real-time interests to help you find like-minded people in your immediate vicinity. He called it ConnectSphere, and as I sat there, listening to him describe my own, long-forgotten dream, my own beautiful, brilliant idea, in his own words, a cold, sick, and horrifying feeling began to creep up my spine. It wasn't just a similar idea, it was my idea. It was serendipity, and he was pitching it to my family as if it were his own. I looked over at my old bedroom door, at the closet where my old laptop was still sitting, quietly sleeping, and I had a sudden, terrible vision of my brother, here during the week, when I was at work, going into my old room and opening my old laptop. The feeling was so strong, so certain, that it was a physical thing. He was a storyteller, I was the builder, and he had just stolen my machine. I sat there on my parents' comfortable sofa, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, and I listened as my brother, Leo, unveiled my own dream. He was a master performer. He didn't talk about code, or databases, or user interface design. He spoke of connection, of community, of a world where loneliness was a thing of the past. He painted a beautiful, soaring, and deeply familiar picture, and he called it ConnectSphere. My mind was a screaming, chaotic mess of déjà vu and a dawning, sick horror. He was using my words, my concepts, the very soul of the project I had poured my heart into 10 years ago. He had taken my quiet, thoughtful little app, Serendipity, and he had repackaged it as his own, bold, visionary masterpiece. When he finally finished his passionate, breathless pitch, the living room was silent for a moment. My parents were looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. They were not just proud, they were enraptured. They had just witnessed the birth of a genius, their son. I, the pragmatist, the builder, the one who actually understood the machine he was pretending to have invented, knew I had to say something, not as an accusation, not yet, but as a test. That's a fascinating concept. Leo, I began, my voice a carefully constructed mask of casual, professional interest. The idea of real-time, interest-based connection is very powerful. I'm curious about the back-end architecture you're envisioning. He looked at me, a flicker of something annoyance panic crossing his face before he covered it with a brilliant, charming smile. Ah, the technical stuff, he said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. Yes, I pressed on, my voice still calm. For the real-time geolocation queries. For example, to avoid latency, are you planning on using a relational database or a more flexible NoSQL solution like MongoDB and the API for the core interest matching algorithm? What language are you thinking of writing it in Python for its data science libraries? Or something faster, like Go? The questions were specific. They were technical. They were the kind of questions that any real developer, any real founder, would have at least a basic answer for. Leo just stared at me, his charming smile now looking a little strained. He let out a short, barking laugh. Whoa, sis, he said, shaking his head. Let's not get bogged down in the boring, nerdy details. That's not my job. I'm the visionary, the big picture guy. I'll hire a team of code monkeys to handle all that. And just like that, he had deflected. And my family, of course, rushed to his defense. Maya, for heaven's sake, my father said, his voice a familiar, weary sigh of disappointment. Not everyone thinks like a computer. Your brother is the creative force here. That is what matters in business. The vision. Just be happy for him, dear, my mother added, her voice full of a gentle, chiding sweetness. This is his moment. It's not a competition. But it was a competition between his beautiful, glittering lie and my quiet, inconvenient truth. And I had just, once again, been told to sit down and be quiet. I sat back, a cold, hard knot of rage and helplessness forming in my stomach. He was going to get away with it. He was going to steal my dream, and my own family was going to hold me down while he did it. But the worst was yet to come. After I had been effectively silenced, my father stood up. He was a man who loved a grand gesture, and he had a look on his face that I knew all too well. It was the look he got right before he was about to do something rash and deeply, financially irresponsible in the name of his golden child. "Leo, my son," he began, his voice thick with a proud, swelling emotion. "Your mother and I, we are not just impressed by your vision, we are moved by it, and we believe in you. We have always believed in you." He looked at my mother, who was already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "And a dream like this, a world-changing idea like this, it needs more than just our encouragement. It needs capital. It needs a real investment." Oh, no, I knew what was coming. I could see the words forming on his lips, and I wanted to scream, to stand up and stop him, but I was frozen in my chair, a silent, horrified witness. "Your mother and I have been talking," my father declared, his voice now a booming announcement. "Our house, this house, is paid off. It is our greatest asset, and we have decided we are going to take out a second mortgage on this house. We are going to invest in your dream. We are going to give you the $200,000 you need to make ConnectSphere a reality." The room was silent for a moment, and then it erupted. My mother was openly sobbing with pride now. She rushed to hug Leo, who was performing a beautiful, masterful pantomime of a man completely overcome with humble, grateful emotion. "Mom, Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. I don't know what to say. I won't let you down. I promise." It was a beautiful, moving, and completely fraudulent family tableau, and I was the only one who could see the rot at its core. I finally found my voice. "No," I said, and the word was a sharp, ugly crack in the middle of their perfect, happy moment. They all turned to look at me. "You can't do this," I said, standing up, my voice shaking with a new kind of terror. This was no longer about a stolen idea. This was about my parents' entire future. "Mom, Dad, please. This is your retirement. This is your home. You cannot risk it all on a startup. It's too dangerous." 99% of them fail. I was throwing my father's own pragmatic, soul-crushing words back at him. He just looked at me, his face a mask of cold, hard disappointment. "That was different. Maya," he said, "that was a silly little art project. This is your brother. This is a sure thing. I know a good investment when I see one. But you don't know anything about this industry," I pleaded. "You are betting your entire life savings on an idea you don't even understand." It was my mother who delivered the final, killing blow. She looked at me, her eyes full of a new, sharp, and deeply wounded resentment. "You just don't want to see him succeed, do you, Maya?" she said, her voice a low, accusatory whisper. "After all these years, you still can't just be happy for your brother. You have always been jealous of his talent, of his vision, and now you are trying to kill his dream, just like you killed your own." And there it was. My sensible, practical, and deeply loving concern for their financial well-being had been reframed as a petty, vicious, and deeply personal act of jealousy. They weren't just ignoring my advice. They were using it as proof of my own flawed, bitter character. There was no arguing. There was no reasoning. They were a united front of delusional, self-sacrificing, and deeply misguided optimism. They were about to drive their car off a cliff, and they were accusing me of being a bad driver for trying to grab the wheel. I just stood there, in the middle of their joyous, tearful celebration, and I felt utterly, completely, and finally alone. My family, the people I had been trying to protect, had just officially, and with great pride, chosen to sacrifice themselves, and me, on the altar of my brother's great, glittering, and stolen lie. I left the dinner that night without another word. I walked out of my childhood home, a place that now felt like a foreign country, a place where I no longer spoke the language. I sat in my car, and the rage, the grief, the profound sense of helplessness, it all coalesced into a new, hard, and deeply practical resolve. If I could not stop them with my words, if they refused to listen to the truth, then I would have to find a different way. I would have to give them proof, hard, cold, and undeniable proof. My old college laptop, the one with the original source code for serendipity, was still in the closet of my old bedroom. It was a ghost in the machine, a silent, digital witness. They thought the battle was over. They thought they had won. They had no idea that the real war, the one for the truth, was just beginning. And I was the only one who had the ammunition. The 6 months that followed that disastrous family dinner were a masterclass in my own personal, quiet, and deeply satisfying hell. My parents, true to their word, took out a massive second mortgage on their home, the home I had grown up in. They handed my brother, Leo, a check for $200,000. It was the starting pistol for his new life as a tech visionary, and the starting pistol for my new life as the bitter, jealous, and resentful older sister. Leo, armed with our parents' entire financial future, was a man transformed. He rented a slick, industrial chic office space downtown. He hired a team of young, eager developers, and he began to build, or rather, he began to pay other people to build the thing he claimed to have invented. And to my absolute, soul-crushing horror, he was good at it, not at the building, of course, but at the selling. He was a natural CEO, a brilliant storyteller. He gave interviews to tech blogs. He created a charismatic, compelling narrative about himself as the young, hungry visionary who was about to change the world. He was a media darling. And his app, ConnectSphere, when it finally launched 4 months later, was a massive runaway, an immediate success. It was a beautiful app. The user interface was sleek, intuitive, and the core concept, the idea of finding spontaneous, real-world connections based on shared interests. It resonated with people. It was a hit. It was the talk of the tech world. And my brother, my charming, fraudulent brother, was the new Steve Jobs, the hometown hero who had made it big. My family was insufferable. They were not just proud. They were vindicated. Their reckless, foolish gamble on their golden child had paid off, and my own quiet, sensible, and deeply pragmatic warnings were now reframed as the bitter, cynical ramblings of a jealous, unsupportive sister. You see, Maya, my father would say to me at our now insufferable Sunday dinners, which had become weekly victory celebrations for Leo, this is what happens when you have vision, when you believe in a dream. You were so worried about the risk. Real visionaries don't see risk, Maya. They see opportunity. You should try it sometime. We are just so proud, my mother would say, her eyes shining with tears of joy. And to think, we almost lost the house for it, but it was all worth it. You should learn from your brother, dear. A little optimism, a little belief. It goes a long way. I had to sit there, week after week, and listen to them praise him, to them celebrate him. And with every word of praise for his genius, for his vision, there was an unspoken, but deeply felt, criticism of me. I was the one who had taken the safe job. I was the one who had no vision. I was the failure. And the worst part, a small, insidious part of my own mind began to believe them. The app was a success. The world saw him as a genius. My own family saw him as a genius. Maybe I was the one who was wrong. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe his idea really was just similar to mine. Maybe he had built it all himself. Maybe my memory of my own college project was clouded by a new, ugly, and deeply shameful jealousy. I was in a fog of self-doubt and a quiet, constant, and aching heartbreak. The moment of clarity, the moment the fog was burned away by the cold, hard, and undeniable light of the truth, came on Thanksgiving Day. The entire extended family was at my parents' house. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of turkey and the even thicker, more cloying scent of my brother's success. He was, of course, the center of attention, a king holding court in the middle of the living room, telling a rapt audience of our aunts and uncles the story of his meteoric rise. I couldn't stand it. I felt like I was suffocating. I excused myself, claiming a headache, and I went upstairs to my old childhood bedroom, the one place in the house that still felt like a sanctuary. It was a time capsule, a room full of the ghosts of the girl I used to be. My old books were still on the shelves. My old, clumsy paintings were still on the walls, and in the back of the closet, under a pile of old sweaters, was my old, clunky, and beloved college laptop. I pulled it out. It was a heavy, gray, plastic thing, a relic from a different technological era. I hadn't turned it on in almost 10 years. I don't know what impulse drove me to do it. A sense of nostalgia, maybe. A desire to connect with the younger, more hopeful version of myself, the girl who had believed in her own ideas. Before my father's pragmatism had so thoroughly extinguished her fire, I found the old power cord. I plugged it in, and with a series of slow, groaning, and deeply reluctant whirs and clicks, the old machine booted up. The screen flickered to life, illuminating my face in its cool, blue light. And there it was, on the old, cluttered desktop. A single folder, Senior Project, Serendipity. My heart gave a painful little lurch. I opened the folder, and it was all there, my old life, my old dream, the business plan, the design mock-ups, and the source code. A dozen different files, filled with the thousands of lines of clumsy, inefficient, but deeply passionate code I had written myself. I sat there, for a long time, just looking at it, a monument to a life I could have had. And then, a new, morbid curiosity took hold. I opened a web browser. The old version of Chrome took a full 2 minutes to load. And I downloaded my brother's app, ConnectSphere. I wasn't an app developer anymore, but I was still a software engineer. I knew how to look under the hood. I ran a simple decompiler program, a tool that would allow me to look at the basic structure of his app's code. I wasn't expecting to find anything, really, just to satisfy my own painful curiosity. And then I saw it. It was in a file labeled Location Match Doc Algorithm.js. It was the core of the app, the algorithm that matched users based on their location and their interests. And as I read the code, a feeling of profound, sickening, and deeply validating horror washed over me. It was my code. It wasn't just similar. It was mine. He had copied and pasted it, line for line, but the proof, the absolute, undeniable, smoking gun, was in the details. Every programmer has a signature, a unique way of writing code that is as personal and as identifiable as their own handwriting. And my brother, who was a brilliant storyteller, but a deeply mediocre programmer, had been too lazy, or too ignorant, to even bother changing my own quirky and deeply personal signatures. He had stolen my work, but he had been too lazy to even file off the serial numbers. There, on line 42 was a variable I had named in a fit of late-night, nerdy humor. Var the answer to everything, 42, a joke from my favorite book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a joke that no one but me would have made. And then, a few lines down, there was a comment, a note left by a younger version of myself. Todo this is a messy, inefficient loop, but it works for now. Need to refactor this later. It's a bit of a magic trick. My words, my own, self-deprecating notes, still embedded in the code of his billion-dollar genius app. But the final, irrefutable proof was the timestamps. I went back to my own project folder. I checked the metadata on my original files. The date created and last modified stamps were all from the spring of 10 years ago, a digital, unforgeable, and legally binding record of my own creation. I leaned back in the chair in my quiet, childhood bedroom, and I looked at the two sets of code, side by side on my screen. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact, a cold, hard, and beautifully, terribly, provable fact. The heartbreak was still there, a deep, aching wound, but it was now completely and totally eclipsed by a new emotion, a cold, quiet, and righteous fury. I was not the jealous sister. I was not the bitter failure. I was the victim of a crime, a profound and deeply personal act of intellectual property theft. I sat there for a long time, the sounds of my family's happy, oblivious Thanksgiving celebration drifting up from downstairs. They were celebrating a hero, a genius, a self-made man. I saved the files. I made 3 separate backups on 3 different USB drives. I took pictures of the screen with my phone. I was no longer an emotional, heartbroken sister. I was a software engineer, gathering evidence. I was an architect, building a case. The time for quiet, sad acceptance was over. The time for being the bigger person was over. The time for politeness was over. The party for the 5th anniversary of his company was in 3 weeks. He was expecting a celebration. He was expecting toasts and praise and the continued blind adoration of his family. He had no idea that I was about to bring a gift. The gift of a cold, hard, and beautifully, publicly presented truth. The reckoning was coming, and I was going to deliver it myself. I left my parents' house that Thanksgiving evening with the quiet, stealthy movements of a thief. I had my old college laptop tucked into a canvas tote bag, its heavy, obsolete weight a solid, reassuring presence against my side. I had a decade of my own history in that bag, my own forgotten genius, and I had just discovered it had been the victim of a heist. The drive home was a blur, the usual. Simmering resentment I felt towards my family had been burned away, replaced by the cold, clear, and deeply focused energy of a woman with a mission. My brother, the storyteller, had told the world a beautiful, compelling lie. Now the builder, was going to show them the ugly, undeniable truth of how he had done it. I spent the entire weekend in a self-imposed lockdown, a digital forensic investigator in my own life. I meticulously backed up every single file from the old laptop. I created a secure, encrypted cloud folder. I documented everything. The original project proposal for Serendipity, dated from my senior year of college. The dozens of drafts of the code, with their clear, chronological timestamps, showing the evolution of the algorithm. The emails to my computer science professor, discussing the very features that were now the celebrated, innovative core of my brother's genius app. It was a perfect, pristine, and undeniable paper trail. By Monday morning, I was no longer a hurt, betrayed sister. I was a plaintiff with an ironclad case. I knew I couldn't do this alone. My fight with my family had always been an emotional one, a battle of feelings and narratives that I had always lost. This was different. This was a battle of facts, of data, of law, and for that, I needed a general, a shark. I spent the day researching the top intellectual property law firms in the city. I found him on a list of the city's most feared litigators. His name was Arthur Sterling, and his reputation was that of a brilliant, relentless, and brutally effective lawyer who specialized in intellectual property theft in the tech world. He was expensive, he was intimidating, and he was perfect. I walked into his office on Tuesday afternoon, a glass and steel tower that looked down on the rest of the city. I was a software engineer from a mid-level firm, in a simple, practical dress. I felt completely out of my depth, but I had my evidence. Mr. Sterling was a man in his 60s, with a sharp suit, a sharper mind, and the kind of calm, predatory stillness of a creature at the very top of the food chain. He listened to my story without interruption, his face a perfect, impassive mask. I didn't cry. I didn't get emotional. I presented my case with the cool, logical precision of a software engineer debugging a program. I laid out the timeline. I explained the functionality of my original app, and then I showed him the code. I had prepared a side-by-side comparison on my laptop. On the left was my original source code for Serendipity. On the right was the decompiled code from my brother's app, ConnectSphere, and I pointed out the smoking guns. You see here, I said, pointing to the screen, this variable name, the answer to everything, 42. It's a reference to a science fiction novel. It was a private joke with myself, and he was too lazy, or too ignorant, to even change it. I scrolled down, and here, this comment. Todo, this is a messy, inefficient loop, but it works for now. Need to refactor this later. It's a bit of a magic trick. Those are my own notes, from 10 years ago, still embedded in his supposedly revolutionary code. I showed him the timestamps. I showed him the emails to my professor. When I was finished, Mr. Sterling was silent for a long, long moment. He leaned back in his massive leather chair. He looked at the evidence on my screen. He looked at me, and a slow, deeply appreciative, and utterly terrifying smile spread across his face. Ms. Vance, he said, his voice a low, admiring purr. This is not just a smoking gun. This is a ballistic missile with your brother's name, address, and social security number painted on the side of it. This is the cleanest, most irrefutable case of copyright infringement and intellectual property theft I have seen in my entire career. A wave of profound, validating relief washed over me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a jealous, bitter sister. I was right. So, he continued, his mind already moving on to the battle plan. Here is what we do. We file a lawsuit immediately. We seek an emergency injunction from a federal judge to have the app immediately removed from all app stores. Then we sue your brother and his company for all profits, plus punitive damages. We will win. It will likely take about 2 years. It will cost a fortune in legal fees, which we will, of course, recover, and at the end of it, you will be a very, very wealthy woman. It was a perfect plan, a sensible plan, a lawyer's plan, and I knew, in that moment, that it was not what I wanted. No, I said. Mr. Sterling's smile faltered. He looked at me, confused. No, a lawsuit is quiet, I explained, my own voice now full of a new, hard certainty. It happens behind closed doors. It will take years. And my family will spend those 2 years telling the world that I am a greedy, vindictive monster who is trying to destroy my brilliant brother out of pure, pathetic jealousy. They are masters of that narrative. I will win the money, yes, but I will lose the story. They will still see me as the failure. I leaned forward. I don't just want the money, Mr. Sterling. The money is secondary. What I want is the truth. And I want the truth to be heard, not by a judge in a quiet courtroom 2 years from now, but by the people he has been lying to. His investors, his employees, his friends, and my parents. I want them to see the proof, with their own eyes, in a way they cannot deny, cannot dismiss, and cannot spin. He just stared at me, a new, intrigued light in his sharp eyes. And how do you propose to do that, Ms. Vance? I told him about the party, the 5th anniversary celebration of his company, the big, public, press-filled event that was scheduled in 2 weeks. I want to present my evidence there, I said, publicly. His eyebrows shot up. That, he said, a note of real admiration in his voice, is a very unorthodox and a very, very risky strategy. It could open you up to a slander lawsuit. It is not the course of action I would legally advise. But it's not slander if it's the truth. Is it? I countered. And I have the proof. The timestamps, the code, the emails. It's not an accusation. It is a statement of verifiable, documented fact. He was quiet for another long moment, assessing me. The lawyer in him was screaming at him to say no, but the litigator, the shark, the man who loved a good bloody fight, was clearly intrigued. It would be a massacre, he finally said. A slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. An absolute, public, career-ending bloodbath. He chuckled. I love it. It's insane. But I love it. So you'll help me, I asked. Help you, he said. My dear Mrs. Vance, I would not miss this for the world. We will not just prepare a presentation. We will prepare a legally airtight, fact-checked, and utterly devastating indictment. We will turn that launch party into a courtroom. And you, my dear, will be the star prosecutor. The rest of the week was a blur of preparation. I worked with Mr. Sterling and his team. They helped me craft my presentation, ensuring that every single claim I made was backed by a piece of hard, undeniable evidence. We were not building an emotional appeal. We were building a case for the court of public opinion. My family, in the meantime, was in a frenzy of their own happy, oblivious party planning. My mother called me every other day, her voice full of a cheerful, bustling energy. Eliza, darling, she'd said. Just last night, I've just confirmed the caterer for the party. It's going to be magnificent. And your father is working on his speech, a tribute to our brilliant, self-made son. We are all just so bursting with pride. Aren't you proud of your brother? Immensely, Mom, I had replied, my voice a perfect, sweet, and loving lie. I can't wait to celebrate him. The party is tomorrow night. My simple black dress is hanging in my closet. My speech is written, and the USB drive containing my presentation. My evidence, my truth, is in my purse. It feels like a small, cold, and very, very powerful weapon. My brother is expecting a party. He is expecting toasts and accolades, and the continued blind adoration of the world. He has no idea that he is not the guest of honor. He is the defendant, and the trial is about to begin. The party was a monument to my brother's ego. He had rented out a sleek, industrial event space downtown, a place of exposed brick, polished concrete floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering city skyline. The room was filled with 100 of his closest friends, colleagues, and the city's most influential tech journalists and investors. It was a victory party, a coronation for the new king of the tech scene. I arrived, as always, playing my designated role. I was the quiet, sensible older sister, in a simple, dark dress, a ghost at my brother's feast. My parents, of course, were in their element. My mother was flitting from group to group, her voice a proud, musical hum as she recounted the story of her brilliant son's meteoric rise. My father stood by the bar, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, accepting the congratulations of his peers with a look of deep, patriarchal satisfaction. Leo himself was incandescent. He moved through the room with the easy, confident grace of a man who knows he is the most important person in it. He saw me standing by the wall, and he came over, a benevolent king greeting one of his humble subjects. "Maya, you made it," he said, giving me a quick, one-armed hug. He gestured to one of his investors standing nearby. "This is my sister." "Maya," he said, a note of fond, condescending amusement in his voice. "She's a coder, too, the sensible one. She writes the boring but necessary code that makes the banks run. I'm the one with the vision." The investor had just laughed politely and turned away, his interest already gone. I was just the boring, practical sister, an irrelevant footnote in my brother's grand story. I just smiled my quiet, pleasant smile. Just wait, I thought. The story is about to get a whole lot more interesting. The formal part of the evening began around 9 o'clock. A small stage had been set up at one end of the room. My father was the first to speak. He walked to the podium, his face flushed with champagne and a deep, emotional pride. "Friends, colleagues, visionaries," he began, his voice booming through the sound system. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate a dream, the dream of my son, Leo." He told the story, the beautiful, fraudulent, and now official family myth. He spoke of Leo as a young boy, always full of big ideas. He spoke of his own parental duty to nurture that brilliant, creative spark. And when Leo came to us, 5 years ago, with this idea for ConnectSphere, my father continued, his voice now thick with a tearful, paternal emotion. It was more than just an idea. It was a revolution. And his mother and I, we knew we had to do whatever it took to make that dream a reality. We are not wealthy people, but we had our home, our legacy. And we made a decision. We bet on our son. We bet the house on him. We took out a second mortgage. We risked our own financial security because we believed, with every fiber of our being, in his genius. The room was silent, completely captivated by this beautiful story of parental sacrifice and filial triumph. My mother was openly weeping in the front row, and it was the greatest investment we have ever made, my father concluded, his voice a proud, triumphant roar. "To my son, Leo, the builder of dreams, the self-made man." The room erupted in a thunderous, standing ovation. To Leo, they all cheered. Leo himself stood up and took a bow, a single, humble tear rolling down his cheek. It was a masterful performance. He then made his way to the stage, ready to give his own speech, to accept his crown. And that was my cue. As the MC was about to introduce him, I quietly, calmly walked up to the stage. I took the microphone from the MC's surprised hand. "Excuse me," I said, and my voice was quiet, but it was amplified, and it was clear, and it cut through the celebratory applause like a surgeon's scalpel. The room fell silent. Every eye was on me. My family stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and annoyance. The help was taking the stage. "Before Leo speaks," I said, my voice steady, my hands not trembling in the slightest, "I, too, would like to say a few words, as his sister, and as the person who is perhaps most responsible for his success. I have prepared a small anniversary gift for him, a short presentation, a little look back at the real, and until now, untold, origin story of ConnectSphere." My mother, in the front row, actually smiled, a look of relieved pleasure on her face. "Oh, how sweet of you, Eliza," she whispered to my father. She thought I was about to play a sentimental photo slideshow of their golden child. She had no idea. I turned to the large projector screen that had been set up behind the stage. I took the small silver USB drive from my purse, and I plugged it into the laptop on the podium. I took the remote in my hand. 5 years ago, I began. My voice a calm, even, and deeply dangerous narration. My brother, the self-made man, began his journey. This is that story. I clicked the remote. The first slide appeared on the massive screen behind me. It was a beautiful, smiling photograph of our family. And the title, in a simple, elegant font, "The Story of a Self-Made Man." The audience let out a small, appreciative sigh. But every story has a beginning. I continued. And this story begins not 5 years ago, but 10 years ago, with a college senior thesis project, a small, ambitious app, written by a nerdy, hopeful computer science major, an app called Serendipity. I clicked again. The next slide was a screenshot of my own original project proposal, the one from my old laptop, dated and time-stamped a decade ago. A confused murmur went through the crowd. My brother, who had been standing on the side of the stage, a proud smile on his face, was now staring at the screen, his smile beginning to falter. I clicked again. "The core of the Serendipity app," I explained, my voice the cool, precise tone of an engineer giving a technical briefing, "was a unique, proprietary, location-based, interest-matching algorithm. It looked like this." The next slide was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was a block of my original, clumsy, but functional code from 10 years ago. On the right was the decompiled code from my brother's genius app, ConnectSphere. They were identical, and I highlighted, in a bright, unforgiving red, the smoking guns, my own, personal, nerdy fingerprints, all over his supposed masterpiece. "As you can see," I said, pointing to the screen, "the code is not just similar, it is a direct, copy and pasted replica, right down to my own, personal, and deeply idiosyncratic variable names, such as this one. Online 42, the answer to everything." And this developer's comment, "Here, this is a messy loop, but it works for now. It's a bit of a magic trick." The room was dead silent now. The confusion had turned into a cold, dawning horror. The tech journalists in the front row were no longer smiling. They were typing, their fingers flying across their phones. My father's face was ashen. My mother's hand was over her mouth, her eyes wide with a new, terrible understanding. Leo was just staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, abject terror. "But a genius idea needs funding," I continued, my voice relentless. And as my father so beautifully explained, he and my mother made a great sacrifice. They mortgaged their home. They bet their entire life savings on their son. I clicked again. The next slide was the scanned copy of my parents' retirement account statement, showing the healthy balance. Click. The next slide was the first withdrawal slip for $100,000, with my brother's signature on it. Click. The next statement, showing the balance plummeting. I walked them through it, slide by devastating slide, the entire, sordid, and until now, secret history of my brother's fraud. The room was a tomb. When I reached the final slide, the one that showed the total amount stolen and the final, pathetic balance in my parents' account, I finally turned to look at my brother. He was a broken man, his face a ruin of shame and exposure. "So I would like to propose a new toast," I said, my voice ringing in the silent, horrified room, not to a self-made man, but to a family that was unmade by a son's greed, and to a sister who, as it turns out, always, always, keeps the receipts. I looked at my brother, my beautiful, golden, and now completely disgraced brother. "Happy anniversary, Leo," I said, and then I unplugged my USB drive from the laptop. I walked off the stage, through the stunned, silent crowd of his now former friends and investors. And I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had just, with a single, brutal, and deeply satisfying PowerPoint presentation, burned his entire, glittering world of lies to the ground. I walked out of that party and into the cool, quiet anonymity of the city night. I didn't go home. I went to a hotel. I turned off my phone, and I slept for 10 hours, a deep, dreamless, and profoundly peaceful sleep for the first time in my adult life. I had not swallowed my anger. I had not politely smiled through my own humiliation. I had taken the ugly, secret truth of my family, and I had held it up to the light for the entire world to see. I had set a fire, and now all I could do was wait for the smoke to clear. The fallout, I learned later, was immediate, and it was catastrophic. My presentation, my anniversary gift, had been a neutron bomb. It had left the building standing, but had vaporized every single person's reputation inside it. The tech journalists who had been at the party had a field day. The story was on every major tech blog by morning. ConnectSphere founder of fraud sister alleges tech's newest star stole code. Defrauded parents. The story of my father's tearful speech about mortgaging their home, followed by my cold, factual presentation of the theft, was an irresistible, Shakespearean drama of family betrayal. The investors, the ones who had been clapping my father on the back just minutes before my speech, pulled their funding that weekend in a joint public statement, citing a crisis of confidence in the company's leadership and intellectual property. The company my brother had built on a foundation of lies and my parents' life savings imploded in less than a week. He was forced into a fire sale, selling off the company's assets for pennies on the dollar just to cover his debts and avoid a dozen different lawsuits. His career as a tech visionary was over. He was a pariah, a joke in the industry he had tried so hard to conquer. But the real wreckage, the real smoldering crater, was at home. For 3 days, I heard nothing from them. I stayed in my hotel, a quiet, neutral territory, and I let them sit in the ruins of their own making. And then, on the 4th day, they came to me. They showed up in the lobby of my hotel, a trinity of defeated, broken, and utterly humbled ghosts. My father, who had always been such a proud, commanding presence, looked small and old. My mother's face was pale and puffy from days of crying. And my brother, Leo, the golden boy, the sun, looked like his light had been permanently extinguished. They didn't yell. They didn't accuse. They just looked at me with the lost, terrified eyes of people who had finally, after a lifetime of ignoring them, run into a consequence they could not talk their way out of. It was my father who spoke first. His voice was a raw, broken whisper. "The bank called this morning," he said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "The second mortgage on the house, with Leo's company now bankrupt. The loan is in default. They're foreclosing. We're going to lose the house. Maya." After 40 years, my mother let out a small, wounded sob. "Please, Maya," she whispered, her voice a pathetic, pleading sound I had never heard from her before. "You have to help us. You're the only one who can. Don't go to the police about what Ethan did. We'll do anything. Just please. Help us save our home." There it was, the moment the title had promised, the begging. They, who had called me a burden, a failure, a pragmatist with no soul, were now on their knees, begging me to be their savior. They were not sorry for the years of dismissal, for the way they had treated me. They were just terrified of being homeless. A part of me, a small, cold, and deeply satisfied part, wanted to say no. I wanted to say, "This is not my problem. You made your bed. Now lie in it." I wanted to turn and walk away, to leave them to the wolves of their own making. But then I looked at them, at my father, who was just a scared old man now, at my mother, who was just a heartbroken old woman, and at my brother, who was just a boy whose ambition had been a cancer that had eaten his own soul. And I felt not triumph, but a deep, profound, and weary sadness. They were my family, and they were a mess, and I, as always, was the only one who knew how to clean it up. But this time, I would do it on my own terms. "I will not go to the police," I said, and I saw a flicker of hope in their eyes. "And I will help you with the house, but not in the way you think." The following week, we had a different kind of family meeting. It was not in their house. It was in the cold, formal conference room of my lawyer, Mr. Sterling. I had spent the week with him, creating a new kind of business plan, a plan for the salvation and restructuring of the Vance family itself. My parents and my brother sat on one side of the long, polished table. I sat on the other, with Mr. Sterling beside me. "Here is the offer," my lawyer began, his voice all business, "as you know. The second mortgage on your home is in default, and the bank is preparing to foreclose. However, my client, Ms. Maya Vance, has made a proposal to the bank." He slid a document across the table to my father. "She has, with her own funds, purchased the mortgage note from the bank in its entirety." Mr. Sterling continued, "As of 9 a.m. this morning, my client, Maya, is now the sole mortgage holder for your property. The bank is no longer your lender. She is." My father stared at the document, his face a mask of stunned, uncomprehending disbelief. "The deed to the house," my lawyer went on, "will be transferred into a new irrevocable trust, with Mrs. Vance as the sole trustee and beneficiary. You, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, will be allowed to continue to reside in the house for the rest of your lives, under a formal rental agreement." He slid another document across the table, a rental agreement. "You will be her tenants. You will pay a monthly rent, a fair market value, which will be deducted from your own pension. The days of living for free, subsidized by your daughter's stolen inheritance, are over." And then he turned to my brother. "And you, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice as cold as ice, "you will also be a tenant in your sister's home, and you will be required to get a job, a real 9-to-5 job. And a significant portion of your salary will be garnished, every single month, until the $307,000 you stole from your parents' retirement account has been paid back in full, with interest." The terms were not cruel. They were a cold, hard, and inescapable consequence. They would not be homeless, but they would no longer be the proud, entitled owners of their own little kingdom. They would be my tenants. They would be living under my roof and under my rules. A year has passed. The house on Maple Street is quiet now. The loud, arrogant energy is gone, replaced by a new, humbled, and much healthier silence. I go there for dinner every Sunday. I no longer cook. My mother, for the first time in 40 years, has learned how to make a roast chicken. It's usually a little dry, but she's learning. My father is quieter now. He talks less about his own past glories and asks more questions about my life, my work. He is learning to listen. And my brother, Leo, he is a changed man. He works a 9-to-5 IT support job for a local company. It is not a glamorous job. It is not a visionary job. It is a job that requires him to show up on time, to be competent, and to be helpful, and he is, to everyone's great surprise, very good at it. He pays his rent to me every month, on time. He is slowly, painfully, paying back his debt, and he is, for the first time in his life, living in the real world. Our relationship is not what it was. It is a fragile, tentative thing, but it is, for the first time, an honest one. I have come to realize that my brutal, public act of revenge at that party was not just an act of anger. It was, in its own strange, terrible way, an act of love. It was an intervention. I had to destroy their world of lies to give them a chance to build a new one, a real one, a world based on the simple, boring, and beautiful principles of honesty and accountability. So I'll leave you with this. To anyone out there who is the burden, the servant, the one who is expected to quietly carry the weight of your own family, I see you. And I want to tell you that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to finally, blessedly, put that weight down. Thank you for listening to my story. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in tough love, in second chances, and in the quiet, beautiful power of a good ironclad legal contract. And remember, you are not the overhead. You are not the staff. You are the most valuable asset in your own life, and it's time you started acting like the owner.